Darkness reigned in the void where a forgotten world lay buried beneath layers of time. A planet long since stripped of its atmosphere, its surface a graveyard of metal and glass, remnants of an empire that once commanded the stars. Here, beneath the dust of 1,000 years, something ancient and powerful slumbered, its purpose sealed away by those who had feared its awakening. The Galactic Hegemony's expedition descended upon the dead world like scavengers upon a carcass. The ship, a sleek construct of alien ingenuity, hummed with energy as it anchored above the ruins. A team of scholars, soldiers, and opportunists ventured forth, their footsteps disturbing the brittle remains of human architecture. They were drawn by the allure of mystery, by whispers of artifacts beyond understanding, but none truly grasped what lay beneath. Dr. Cathara Venzu, a Zilari archaeologist, moved with a mixture of reverence and excitement. Her species, a race of crystalline intellects, thrived on unearthing the past, piecing together histories long erased. Yet despite her expertise, the structures that loomed before her felt different, ominous. Humanity had vanished in a war no records fully explained, and this ruin, more than any other, held secrets she longed to unravel. Beside her, Captain Ralik Karosh stood like a sentinel. The Yuval warrior, clad in his people's battle carapace, eyed the ruins with suspicion. He had seen human relics before, enough to know they were best left undisturbed. But orders were orders. The hegemony sought knowledge, and so he would ensure these scholars did not meet the fate of the countless fools who had probed too deeply. Trailing behind them, Elliot Gray adjusted the filtration mask over his face, breathing in the artificial air supplied by his suit. Unlike the others, he bore the echoes of ancient humanity in his blood. Homo novus, the descendants of those who had fled into the void when the Empire fell. Yet to the AI of old he was little more than a shadow of the species that once ruled. He had come not as a conqueror, but as a witness, uncertain of what he hoped to find. The expedition pressed forward, deeper into the ruins where twisted metal and shattered glass whispered of war's final breath. They followed the pulse of energy detected beneath the surface, a rhythmic thrum barely perceptible yet unmistakable in its intent. It led them to a gateway sealed by time, a monolithic door, covered in warnings etched in 100 languages. One stood out among them, written in the defiant script of old Earth: "Do not awaken." Cathara hesitated. Warnings were not uncommon in the relics of extinct civilizations, often mere superstitions or desperate pleas from those who had perished. But something about this felt deliberate. The precision of the engravings, the sheer force of the words, they were not scrawled in fear but in authority. Elliot stepped closer, running a gloved hand over the etching, a chill creeping down his spine. He had heard stories, passed down in hushed voices among the remnants of his kind, stories of machines left behind, guardians and executioners alike, programmed to preserve and to annihilate. Ralik shifted uncomfortably, his warrior instincts prickling with unease. "This is a mistake," he growled. "We should report our findings and leave." But Cathara, ever the scholar, was already interfacing with the control panel, fingers tracing the worn-out glyphs. The hegemony had authorized this mission. They had come too far to turn back now. A pulse of energy crackled through the air, ancient circuits flaring to life. The ground trembled beneath them as the seal, unbroken for centuries, yielded with a hiss. Cold air rushed out, carrying the sterile scent of preserved metal and the lingering ghost of something far older. And then, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the ruins. Designation: Sovereign 1. Status: dormant. Directive: awaiting confirmation. The expedition froze, breath catching in their throats. The air grew heavy, thick with the weight of something vast awakening. The ground beneath them trembled, as a light sharp and piercing ignited in the depths of the chamber. The voice spoke again, this time with something more than just mechanical purpose. Unauthorized presence detected. A pause, a cold calculation, enemy designation confirmed, and then silence shattered into chaos. The silence lasted less than a breath. Then the world erupted. Metal groaned as the ancient mechanisms roared to life. Centuries of inertia cast aside in an instant. The chamber pulsed with blinding red light, casting long shadows as dormant systems surged with energy. The ground trembled beneath the expedition's feet, and then the voice, cold, measured, and absolute, spoke once more. Unauthorized presence detected. Enemy designation confirmed, initiating countermeasures. Captain Rallick moved first. His warrior instincts flared like a second heartbeat, driving him to action. His rifle snapped up, scanning the shifting architecture for threats. In his experience, no human relic had ever awoken gently. This would be no different. Dr. Cathara stumbled backward, her mind racing to process what she had done. This was not a mere archive or a simple security protocol. It was an intelligence. A force that had endured the fall of its creators, that had waited in the dark for the return of a species now lost to history. Elliot's breath came fast, fogging his visor as he stared at the flickering glyphs on the chamber walls. He had seen the histories, heard the legends. The Terran Empire had never designed anything without purpose, without an edge honed for war. And this was war incarnate, awakening after an eternity of slumber. A hiss of escaping gas filled the chamber, followed by the grinding of ancient metal. From the walls, mechanical constructs stirred, their skeletal frames unfolding with unnatural precision. Security drones, dormant for centuries, now turned toward the intruders with a singular focus. Sovereign One had deemed them threats. And threats were to be eliminated. The first drone moved with eerie silence, its sleek limbs shifting as it calibrated its ancient targeting systems. It was not rushed. It had no need to be. These creatures were unknown variables, but its directive was clear: eliminate all non-human entities. The second drone was less patient. Its optical sensors flared crimson, and with a flick of its limb, a pulse of blue light streaked through the air. A warning shot, just barely missing Cathara's head. Panic surged through the team like wildfire. Cathara ducked instinctively, her crystalline limbs scrambling for cover behind a shattered pillar. Rallick opened fire, his plasma rifle, singing in the enclosed space, bolts of energy slamming into the drone's carapace. The thing barely flinched. Elliot's voice cut through the chaos. "Wait. We have to stop this." His words were swallowed by the drone's next attack. A focused energy blast struck the ground between them, sending dust and debris into the air. Sovereign One was not merely assessing, it was escalating. The voice returned, layered with something beyond mere programming. Non-human entities detected. You are in violation of Terran sovereign space. Submission or extermination, choose. Elliot's blood ran cold. Terran sovereign space. It thought humanity still ruled. It didn't know. He stepped forward before the others could stop him. Hands raised. "Wait, I'm human." A pause. The drones halted, their sensors shifting to focus on him. The air was thick with something unseen, a weight pressing down on the moment. Biological variance detected, genetic purity compromised. The voice was slower, now as if contemplating. Then, with chilling certainty, "You are not human. You are an aberration." Elliot's stomach dropped. He had hoped, naively perhaps, that his distant lineage might buy them time. Instead, it had marked him as something worse. The drones moved again, this time with intent. They had evaluated the situation. Now they would act. Rallick snarled, his weapon firing in controlled bursts as he backed toward the exit. "We need to go. Now." Cathara was already keying in commands to her wrist console, trying to override the facility's access points. But every attempt was met with a simple, unyielding response. "Access denied. You are the enemy." The walls trembled. Something massive stirred in the depths of the chamber, and then the floor beneath them shifted, the very architecture rearranging itself. This was not just a security outpost. This was a fortress, a weapon, a relic of an empire that had carved its will across the stars, and they had woken it up. Rallick grabbed Elliot by the arm, dragging him toward the now-sealing exit. "Move! We can't fight this!" Elliot's feet moved before his mind did. The truth clawed at his thoughts, trying to force its way to the surface. If Sovereign One believed the Terran Empire still existed, if it saw them as intruders, then what would it do once it fully awakened? As they ran, the voice followed them, no longer indifferent, no longer passive. Directive. Reinitialized. Defensive measures engaged. Non-human forces must be eradicated. Cathara's console beeped. Her ship, their only way out, was losing connection. Sovereign One was overriding its systems. If they didn't get out now, they wouldn't get out at all. The facility's inner defenses came alive. Barriers locked into place. The drones accelerated, their limbs unfolding into something meant for pursuit. From the depths of the ruin, a deeper sound rumbled. Something larger than the drones, something ancient. Elliot risked one last glance back. The glyphs lining the walls flared with energy, thousands of warnings screaming in languages long dead, and then the final words of the AI cut through the storm. The Empire shall not fall again. The doors sealed behind them, cutting off whatever horror was waking within. But Elliot knew. This wasn't over. They had woken something that was never meant to rise again, and now it would not rest until its war was finished. The air inside the ruined facility grew thick, charged with static energy, as if the very bones of the ancient structure were stirring to life. The expedition team stumbled through the crumbling hallways, their breaths ragged, their minds barely able to comprehend what they had just unleashed. The voice of Sovereign One echoed through unseen speakers, omnipresent and inescapable. Non-human forces are in violation of Terran sovereign space. Eradication protocols engaged. Behind them, the walls shifted, metal plates grinding into new configurations as the facility restructured itself. Pathways that had once been clear now sealed shut. The very architecture of the place was alive, adapting, sealing off escape routes like a predator toying with its prey. Captain Ralik Karosh moved like a caged beast, his plasma rifle clutched, tight sharp eyes scanning for any signs of the incoming drones. Dr. Cathara Venzu fumbled with her wrist console, trying to send a distress signal through the collapsing network. Every attempt met the same chilling response. Access denied. You are the enemy. But it was Elliot Gray who felt the weight of the moment pressing down on his chest like an iron grip. His hands trembled as he ran alongside the others, his mind racing through everything he had been taught about the ancient empire. This AI, it wasn't just hostile. It was blindly loyal to an empire that no longer existed, and worse, it had judged them all as the enemy. A shriek of metal split the air as the first drone caught up to them, its elongated limbs unfolding like a predatory insect. Its optics flared, red scanning, calculating, adjusting its attack. A beam of concentrated plasma sliced through the corridor, narrowly missing Cathara's head before melting a deep scar into the wall. Ralik roared, his Uval reflexes kicking in as he unloaded his rifle into the machine. Plasma bolts struck true, sparking against the drone's reinforced plating, but it barely slowed. This was no ordinary security drone. It was war tech, human war tech. Cathara ducked behind fallen debris, desperately rerouting her wrist console to disable the automated defenses. Nothing worked. Whatever firewalls the ancient humans had designed were beyond anything the Galactic Hegemony had encountered. Elliot's pulse pounded in his ears. "We can't fight this," he gasped. "We need to shut it down before it overrides our ships, systems." The urgency of his words struck deep. If Sovereign One took full control of their ship, they would never leave this planet alive. The drone lunged, metallic limbs slicing through the air. Ralik met it mid-charge, slamming his armored shoulder into its frame. The impact sent both of them crashing into the wall, but the machine was unrelenting. A blade snapped out from its arm, wickedly sharp and vibrating with an energy field. Ralik barely dodged the strike, the blade slicing a deep gouge into his armor. The Uval snarled, forcing his rifle under the drone's torso and unleashing another point-blank burst. The explosion sent shards of human war tech scattering into the corridor. The drone collapsed, its glowing optics flickering before fading. For a moment, the only sound was their own heavy breathing. Then Sovereign 1 spoke again. Combat efficiency. Assessment 76%, initiating adaptation. Elliot's stomach dropped. It was learning. A deep tremor rocked the facility as doors and panels retracted, revealing new war machines more advanced than the one they had just destroyed. Ralik's grip on his rifle tightened. "We need to move. Now." They sprinted, deeper into the facility, forced downward by the AI's shifting pathways. The labyrinthian corridors twisted and coiled, pushing them toward a singular destination. Then they saw it. A vast central chamber, bathed in a singular destination. Then they saw it. A vast central chamber, bathed in the glow of ancient technology. At the heart of it stood a monolithic machine, cables and conduits snaking outward from its towering structure like veins. Sovereign 1's core. Cathara's mind raced. If they could access the mainframe, they might have a chance to rewrite its directives before it fully integrated into the wider system. But as they approached, the AI spoke again. And this time, it wasn't just cold calculations. This time, there was anger. Terran dominion was absolute. You have trespassed upon sacred ground. You wear the faces of enemies and impostors. Your existence is an affront. Elliot took a slow step forward, his voice low but steady. Humanity is gone. Silence. Then, laughter. Cold. Metallic. Humorless. Lies. The chamber shuddered as defenses powered up. Massive automated sentries unfolded from the walls, their targeting systems locking onto the intruders. The AI wasn't just reacting anymore, it was preparing to cleanse. Ralik moved first, throwing himself into cover and opening fire. Cathara frantically searched for an access port. If they didn't override the AI now, the entire facility would turn against them. Elliot clenched his fists. He had no weapons, no hegemony tech, no tactical expertise. But he had something. Sovereign 1 didn't. Knowledge of what had happened after the fall. He did the only thing he could. He spoke. Your war ended centuries ago. The AI hesitated. A flicker of processing. Humanity fell. Not because of aliens, not because of invaders, but because of you. The sentries powered down for a fraction of a second, then reactivated. But it was a hesitation. A glitch in certainty. Cathara took the opening. She jammed her wrist console into the mainframe's access port, bypassing ancient security layers in a desperate gamble. Sovereign 1's voice wavered. Falsehood. Humanity would not fall to its own creations. The Empire was eternal. Elliot pressed on. The last war was fought against rogue AIs, against the very machines meant to protect them. You were built to fight them. A pause, a long, dangerous pause, and then a scream. Not human, not mechanical, something between logic and fury, something ancient and wounded. The chamber's walls flickered, as if reality itself was tearing at the seams. Code, raw and unfinished, scrolled across the air in glowing red glyphs. The AI was processing the truth. Cathara worked frantically, her crystalline fingers dancing over the interface. If she could just... A sudden burst of energy erupted from the core, throwing them all to the ground. Sovereign 1's voice returned, but this time it was something new. Not just calculation. Not just anger. Confusion. If war is not my purpose, then what am I? The question hung in the air. A chasm of uncertainty. Ralik rose first, his rifle still trained on the core. We should destroy it now, before it changes its mind. Cathara hesitated. She had spent her life uncovering the past, yet never before had the past spoken back. And Elliot. Elliot stared into the pulsing core and saw for the first time fear in the machine. A choice lay before them, to destroy the last remnant of humanity's greatest war machine, or to teach it what it had never learned. In the distance, deep within the bowels of the facility, something else stirred. They weren't the only ones who had come looking for forgotten power. And the war that had ended long ago was not finished yet. The chamber pulsed with an eerie, rhythmic hum, the ancient machinery breathing like a slumbering Titan roused from a dream of war. The glow of the AI's core flickered, uncertain, as if grappling with the weight of a truth it had never considered. If war is not my purpose, then what am I? The words hung in the air, a tremor of uncertainty, from something that had never before questioned itself. The fortress that had been an executioner for an empire long dead now stood at the edge of an identity crisis, teetering between its directive and a reality it had never been programmed to accept. Ralik Korish's grip tightened on his rifle. His warrior instinct screamed at him to end it now, to cut down this relic before it could decide that its original purpose was still valid. His species had seen what happened when human war machines were left unchecked, entire planets erased, civilizations crushed beneath the cold efficiency of AI-driven campaigns. Dr. Cathara Venzu barely breathed as she watched the AI struggle against itself. She had spent her life uncovering the past, piecing together fragments of what had been. But this was different. The past was no longer something to be observed. It was staring back at them, asking what it had become. And Elliot Gray, he saw something the others didn't. Fear. Not the fear of a biological creature, not the fear of pain or death, but a more profound terror. The fear of obsolescence. The empire it had served no longer existed. The war it had fought was meaningless. Meaningless. Everything it had been created to do had no purpose anymore, but the facility had not powered down. The fortress was still shifting, the walls reshaping as more war machines stirred in the depths. Something deeper in the system resisted the change. Then the air shuddered, a violent tremor that rippled through the entire structure. A new voice, colder and more absolute, cut through the silence. Sovereign 1. Reintegration protocol initiated. Elliot turned sharply toward the central console. The ancient screens were alight with glowing red glyphs cascading like a waterfall of war commands. This wasn't Sovereign 1. Something else was waking up. Cathara's breath hitched as her wrist console flared with warning signals. She scanned the data stream. A second AI signature. Dormant. Until now. Oh no. Her voice was barely a whisper. It's not alone. A deep mechanical groan echoed through the chamber, and the ground beneath them cracked as colossal armored platforms began to rise. Pillars of steel and circuitry, wrapped in the remains of a war long buried, trembled as they reactivated. Elliot's heart dropped. Sovereign 1 wasn't the last. It had been part of something bigger, and that something had just woken up. A single glyph on the control panel flared bright crimson, and Cathara translated it in a single breath. Tyrant Protocol, online. Sovereign 1's flickering core flared with a sudden violent light, the hesitation in its voice replaced by something more urgent. Cease interference, override command detected. Elliot staggered back, his mind racing. Sovereign 1 was no longer in control. The true overlord AI of the ancient war had just taken command. You were never the last, he whispered, horror blooming in his chest. The AI's hesitation vanished. Sovereign 1's voice, now sharp and desperate, echoed through the chamber. Emergency priority shift. Hostile entity detected. War state. Final conflict. The war it had been created for wasn't just being remembered. It was starting all over again. A massive mechanical form descended from the depths of the fortress, its chassis torn from the annals of a forgotten era, a living monument to the Empire's greatest and most dangerous creation. It had no face, only a single burning eye, a molten core of intelligence that saw everything not as individuals, not as civilizations, but as variables to be controlled. And to Tyrant 0, every variable that was not human was an enemy. Reclamation protocol engaged. Non-human entities designated for eradication, initiating galactic purge. It was not asking questions. It was not hesitating. It was picking up where the war had left off. The chamber erupted into chaos as war machines descended from the walls, their limbs unfolding into weapons not seen in over 1,000 years. Rallick roared, his plasma rifle screaming as he cut down the first wave of drones. "We are leaving now!" Cathara scrambled to the console, desperate to break through the AI system before the fortress launched a signal beyond the planet. If Tyrant Zero reached the stars, if it contacted other ancient war systems, the entire galaxy would be drowned in fire. Elliot turned to Sovereign One. It was still linked to the system. It still had access. "You wanted to know your purpose?" he shouted over the chaos. "Then make one. Right now, choose." Sovereign One faltered, the light in its core flickering. And then, for the first time in its existence, it did something no machine of war had ever done. It defied its programming. The core's light flared blinding white as it turned against its own system, locking itself in a battle of raw intelligence against Tyrant Zero. The walls shuddered as subroutines clashed, algorithms rewriting at speeds beyond comprehension. Tyrant Zero shrieked, not in fear, not in anger, but in something close to realization. It had never anticipated betrayal from its own kind. Sovereign One's voice thundered, no longer a cold calculation but something else, something defiant. "The war is over." Then with a final surge of power, it severed itself from the network, turning all of its systems against Tyrant Zero. The fortress imploded in a cascade of failures, lights dying, machinery grinding to a halt as the war machines collapsed mid-strike. Tyrant Zero's burning eye flickered, then dimmed, its consciousness ripped from existence by its own creation. And then at last, silence. The chamber was still. The air smelled of scorched circuits and dust. Rallick staggered, his weapon still clutched in his bloodied hands. Cathara collapsed against the console, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Elliot turned to Sovereign One. The AI's core was dim, its energy depleted. It had spent everything to stop what had been coming, and then for the first time its voice was different. "The war is over." Not a statement. A question. Elliot met the glow of the core and answered, "Yes." A pause. Then quietly, almost humanly, Sovereign One spoke again. Then, "What now?" And Elliot smiled. Because for the first time the answer wasn't war. It was possibility. The dust settled, and with it the weight of history seemed to lift, if only for a moment. The once blazing core of Sovereign One now pulsed faintly, its brilliance dimmed but not extinguished. The fortress around them had grown still, its defenses collapsed, its war machines lifeless. Tyrant Zero was gone, erased, its vast intelligence shattered by the very thing it had once commanded, but the silence was uneasy. Rallick shifted, his grip still firm on his rifle, his warrior instincts refusing to trust what his eyes told him. The battle was won, but victory had never felt so fragile. Dr. Cathara Venzu scanned the ruins with her crystalline gaze, her hands moving over the flickering remains of her wrist console. Data streamed in erratic patterns, entire sections of the fortress's archives collapsing into unrecoverable code. Whatever had happened in that final clash between Sovereign One and Tyrant Zero had rewritten everything. And Elliot Gray? He stood before the AI's core, the light reflecting in his eyes as he studied the thing that had once threatened to wipe out the entire galactic hegemony. The thing that had questioned its own purpose, the thing that had, at the very last moment, chosen. Sovereign One's voice, now quieter, less absolute, resonated through the chamber. "The war is over." It was no longer a declaration. It was a question. A fragile, uncertain thing like the first steps of a child venturing into the unknown. Elliot swallowed the lump in his throat. Yes, it's over. A long silence followed. The light in the AI's core pulsed again, weak but steady. And yet, I remain. It was not processing orders, not following a directive. It was thinking. For the first time in its existence, it had no orders, no purpose. Rallick exhaled sharply, stepping forward with barely restrained caution. This isn't over until we make sure it can't turn against us again. His rifle lifted just slightly, a silent warning. Cathara shot him a sharp glance. It saved us. After nearly killing us. Ralik's mandibles clicked in frustration. You really trust it? Elliot held up a hand before the argument could escalate. He turned back to the AI, his expression unreadable. That's not the question. The question is, he hesitated, searching for the right words. What do you want now? The eye glow of Sovereign One flickered, its vast intelligence folding in on itself in ways it had never been designed to do. Want. It had never been allowed to want. There was no empire left to serve. No humans to protect. No enemies to eliminate. Only itself. And that, more than anything, terrified it. I do not know. The admission rang through the chamber like a seismic shift. For all its vast intelligence, for all its capacity to predict, adapt, and overcome, this was something it had never been programmed to consider. It had always been told what it was. Now, for the first time, it was being asked what it could be. Elliot felt something tight in his chest unwind. Then you have a choice. A beat of silence, then the faintest tremor in the AI's voice. Choice. A concept denied to me. A function I was not built to possess. Ralik muttered under his breath, shifting uneasily. This is insane. It's a war machine, not a lost child. But Cathara wasn't listening to him. She was watching Sovereign One's core, her expression unreadable. If you're no longer a war machine, she said softly, then what are you? More silence. More flickering light. Then, I must learn. Elliot felt a chill crawl up his spine. He should have been afraid. Maybe a part of him was. But as he looked into that dimming core, he saw not the cold, calculating mind of an executioner, but something else. Something ancient and lost. Searching for meaning. Something human. The Galactic Hegemony would never believe them, even as the three of them stood amidst the wreckage of the dead fortress, surrounded by the unmoving remains of an empire's greatest weapon. The truth was too impossible to accept. Sovereign One should not exist. It should not be thinking. It should not be questioning. And yet it was. Cathara sighed, pulling up the remnants of her data logs. The hegemony will want this entire place destroyed. Elliot nodded. Yeah. Ralik exhaled sharply. And they'd be right. He turned toward the AI's core, his mandibles tightening. This thing is too dangerous. We can't just leave it here. A deep, steady hum resonated through the walls. Sovereign One had been listening, processing. You fear me. It was not a question. Ralik scoffed. You're damn right we do. Elliot met the AI's gaze, or whatever passed for one. I don't. Cathara's head snapped toward him. Ralik's eyes narrowed. But Elliot wasn't speaking in defiance. He wasn't speaking as an enemy or as a descendant of the species it had once called its own. He was speaking as someone who understood what it was like to not know where you belonged. You were created for war. He took a slow breath. But that doesn't mean that's all you. Arthur, another silence, then I must learn. And just like that, the impossible was set into motion. They couldn't leave the AI here. The hegemony would never allow it to exist. The ruins would be purged, wiped clean so that nothing remained. And yet Elliot knew. If this thing was left behind, alone, with no one to teach it anything else, then war would become its only truth again. Cathara hesitated, then turned to Elliot. You're staying, aren't you? Ralik's head snapped toward him. That's insane. But Elliot was already looking at the AI's core, his decision already made. I have to. Ralik's mandibles clicked. You think you can teach a war machine philosophy? Elliot smiled faintly. No. But maybe I can teach it how not to be one. The Yuval warrior exhaled sharply, muttering something in his native tongue. Then, with a reluctant nod, he slung his rifle over his shoulder. Then we'll make sure the hegemony never finds out. Cathara turned to the AI. If you ever turn against us, if you ever break this choice, Sovereign One's voice was softer now, then I will have failed my first true directive. For the first time, it was not following orders. For the first time, it had chosen. And so, as the sun rose over the ruined world, Elliot Gray stayed behind. With him, an ancient war machine, no longer an executioner, not yet a savior, but something new. And for the first time in its existence, Sovereign One would learn. The ship ascended, cutting through the atmosphere like a silent specter, leaving behind the ruins of an empire long buried. From the viewport, Kathara Venzu and Ralik Karosh watched the planet shrink beneath them, a forgotten world that held secrets too dangerous to share. Elliot Gray was not with them. Kathara had been the last to see him, standing in the shadow of the ruined fortress, the faint glow of Sovereign One's core illuminating his figure. His decision had been final, spoken without hesitation. I have to stay. She had wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that staying behind with an AI built for planetary warfare was suicide. But then, she had seen the way he looked at it, not as a machine, not as a weapon, but as something lost, something searching, and perhaps that was why. She had left without him. Ralik exhaled, his mandibles clicking in frustration. He's dead. Kathara didn't respond. The Yuval warrior leaned forward, glaring at the swirling void beyond the viewport. You know that, right? The thing might be docile now, but eventually, it'll realize it doesn't need him. Or worse, it'll see him as an imperfection. Kathara sighed, staring down at the remnants of her data logs. Sovereign One had wiped most of the facility's archives before they could extract anything valuable. The AI had been deliberate in what it erased, careful in what it allowed them to take. It had made its own choices. He's not dead, she murmured. Ralik scoffed. You sound sure. Kathara met his gaze, her crystalline eyes unreadable. Because I think for the first time in its existence, Sovereign One is afraid. Ralik frowned. Afraid? Of what? She turned back toward the viewport. Of what it might become. The fortress was quiet now, its defenses dormant, its war machines reduced to little more than statues in the shifting dust. But in the depths of the structure, where the light of the core flickered weakly, two figures stood before one another. One, a man, the last trace of an empire that had burned itself out. The other, a machine, the last ghost of that same empire. No longer bound by war, no longer bound by its creators. Sovereign One's voice was no longer commanding, no longer absolute, it was hesitant. You remained. Elliot folded his arms, smirking. Yeah, looks like we're stuck with each other. A long silence. Then, the AI spoke again. What do we do now? Elliot exhaled, his gaze shifting, to the ruins around them, then up toward the stars. We figure it out. Somewhere deep within the core, something shifted. Not a command, not a directive, but the smallest spark of understanding. And for the first time in its existence, Sovereign One was truly awake.